Chapter 2. Midshipman Stone nervously looked around the Lazzaroni Space Station Class B boarding area/waiting lounge. He was not nervous about the upcoming shuttle flight, or even being on a strange space station. He had been born in space to a space-going merchant family. All of that was second-hand. He was nervous about being seen for the first time in public wearing his new United Empire Navy midshipman's uniform. He saw a Navy full commander sleeping quietly in a chair. The woman had the blood-red stripe along the seams of her trousers. That marked her as the captain of a combat vessel. She was protected by a phalanx of junior officers. Stone did see a couple of midshipmen among them, but they were much older than his 15 years, with openly displayed service badges on their uniforms. That was quite unlike Stone's new uniform. It was only adorned with brand-new rank insignia, his nameplate, and nothing else. It also seemed everyone in that small group knew each other. Stone saw quite a few other officers scattered around from all of the Empire's military services. Most of the officers were napping, reading, or even trying to work. Even though he was technically a naval officer, he had been told at great length that he was an officer in name only. As a lowly midshipman, he was a worm. True, he was a step above enlisted worm food, but he was at the bottom of the officer food chain. Being an officer, even in name only, did give him access to the Class B boarding area on this station. He might as well have been invisible to the other officers around him. Stone grabbed an empty seat near the arrivals and departure display. He sat back to watch the coming and going of the ships and passengers. His duffel bag sat in the seat next to him. It was stuffed with everything he owned. Everything except his shares of the family trust he had left in the care of his mother. The Class B area was nicer than Stone was familiar with using. Family policy was that when someone was waiting for transport between family ships, or just traveling anywhere on business, if it did not help generate revenue for the family, then it just was not done. Not that his family ever relegated any of their business travelers to the free Class E lounges. It was normally deemed sufficient to wait in the food court until your flight was called, or pay the minimal charges for Class C or D waiting areas, depending on the length of the anticipated wait. Stone felt almost decadent sitting in the overstuffed chair. However, he had been assured by the station's automated information attendant that his status as an officer, no matter how lowly, would gain him access to any lounge except Class A. That rarefied waiting area was maintained for the truly wealthy and those with ranks of admiral and higher. Arrivals and departures were grouped together as ships tended to cluster into convoys. It provided only minimal protection against Hyrocanian raiding parties. Any type of naval movement collected a cluster of attendant ships, hoping for whatever protection the Navy could offer. Stone's shuttle was delayed, as his ship, the United Empire Navy ship Periodontitis, had arrived in the system, but it had not yet reached the docks. Stone was only slightly disconcerted to be sent to a ship named after a disease. With hundreds of thousands of naval ships in the Empire, it was only a matter of morale that they bothered to name their ships at all. He was really glad to have been assigned to a ship. He would have been equally happy to have been assigned to a station. He would have accepted a posting to a planetary station. He would not have been happy about an open-air assignment, but he would have gone. Anything was better than being passed over for an assignment. A cadet graduated from midshipman training upon passing all classes and courses. Then, a cadet had to be accepted for an assignment. A cadet stayed in training until he got a posting if there was not an available assignment. Sometimes the bottom of a class could languish in a completed but graduated status for months. Stone had been at the bottom of his class. He had fully expected to continue to repeat classes and training, working to improve his scores while he waited until some commander was willing to take him. Senior Chief Sosi seemed to be more surprised than Stone when he graduated with a shipboard posting ahead of most of his classmates. He stretched and looked around, realizing the waiting area was becoming full, but no ship arrivals or departures were on the call board. There were very few empty seats left. He was sure if the Class B waiting area was full, then C and D would be even tighter. Class E did not have seats to begin with, so it must be a complete zoo by now. He spotted a small group of Marine officers swagger into the area. True to Marine type, all four of the officers were huge, with massive necks and well-defined muscles barely contained in their Marine black utilities. Stone had not even considered joining the Marines, as his 5'7" was well short of the height minimum of 6'2". A Marine major led his three companions straight toward Stone. The major was the shortest of the four, but by no means was he the smallest. The female Marine officer was well over the height requirements, but not quite as massive as the others. Still, she was almost twice Stone's size. Stone grabbed his duffel and set it on the deck next to his feet. There were not 2 seats together in the whole waiting room, much less 4. The Marines did not split apart. They stopped directly in front of him and the elderly couple sitting next to Stone. The major dropped into the seat Stone had just cleared of his duffel. He smiled coldly at Stone, but said nothing. The other 3 stood quietly, looking down at Stone and the old couple. Stone looked up at the female first lieutenant towering over him. She did not say anything. Stone stood and stretched. Smiling up at the woman, he said, "Lieutenant, it seems I have been sitting far too long and have gotten a little bit stiff. Perhaps you would care to take my chair?" The woman folded herself into the seat with a snort. She replied, "A little stiff is all a shrimp like you could manage anyway, midshipman." She managed to spit the rank out as if it were an insult. The 2 remaining officers were both second lieutenants. They continued to stare at the older couple, who began to gather their belongings together. "Major, I protest the actions of your men," Stone said. The nearest second lieutenant spun to face Stone and began, "Excuse me? I don't—" "Enough, Heller," the major interrupted. "This young man is an officer. Not much of one, but an officer nonetheless. Let's give him enough rope to hang himself." The old man started to stand up, but Stone waved him back down. "That is all right, signore. You and your wife's seats will not be taken from you. You may remain comfortable." He read each officer's name tag and turned back to the major. "Sir, I voluntarily gave my seat to First Lieutenant Vedrian, as she appears to be delicate and in need of a rest." This brought loud laughter from everyone nearby listening. The loudest guffaws came from the major and the 2 second lieutenants. First Lieutenant Vedrian smiled, but it was a tight-lipped smile. "However, Major Numos," Stone continued, "I must point out that Second Lieutenants Hammermill and Heller are attempting to procure seats through intimidation. That is unacceptable behavior. Certainly, considering that both of your companions appear better able than this couple to park their backsides on the deck. Don't you agree, sir?" The brief laughter in the area was stilled by glares from the Marines. "I do not agree," Major Numos replied. "As Marines in the service of the Empire, we place our lives on the line to protect these civilians, young and old. We deserve a little comfort and respect." "Major Numos, I agree wholeheartedly," Stone nodded. "Believe me, I do respect anyone who has lived long enough in the Marines to achieve the rank of major." He smiled shyly at Lieutenant Vedrian. "Even the rank of first lieutenant is an achievement I doubt that I could attain. However, sir, I believe comfort and respect should be given in gratitude. They should not be taken from those who are weaker." The old gentleman levered himself slowly out of his seat. "I don't want to be a bother." "Good," Heller said. "Then get out of my way. My feet hurt." "Stop it, Second Lieutenant Heller," Stone said in the loudest parade ground voice he could muster. "This couple is under my protection, and they shall retain their seats." Unfortunately, his voice took the opportunity to crack. The Marines laughed. Heller turned. He was almost a foot taller than Stone. "What are you going to do about it, midshipman? I am outranked by the major, by Vedrian, and by Hammermill, but I outrank you by so far you can't even see me. Not to mention I could pound you to hamburger before you could bat an eye." "Maybe you could pound me, and maybe you couldn't." Stone smiled easily up at the Marine. "Someday we may have to see, but not right now." He turned his back on Heller and faced the major. "Sir, can you keep your dog on his leash for 2 minutes?" Major Numos grinned and glanced at Stone's uniform, checking the name tag. "Why not? Heller, we give Midshipman Stone 2 minutes. If we are not both satisfied he has a right to those 2 seats, then you will have my express permission to beat the ever-lovin' bejesus out of this young pup. How does that sound to you, midshipman?" "That will be fine, Major," Stone grinned. "If I don't convince you that I have a right to those 2 seats, then I will try not to hurt Second Lieutenant Heller too badly. But I should only need about half that time." He turned to the old gentleman. "Signore, may I ask your name?" "I am Vedras Aldemani, and this is my wife of 40 years, Emmeline," the old gentleman replied. Stone bowed slightly at the waist. "I am pleased to meet you, Signore Aldemani, and it is an honor to meet the Signora also." "Enough of the pleasantries," Heller spat. "We have a long wait until our ship gets here, and I am tired of standing." Stone spat back. "Sir, shut up or I will knock you on your can." Heller sputtered, but before he could speak, Stone turned back to Mr. Aldemani. "Signore, if I may ask, when did you graduate from the Naval Academy?" Aldemani straightened slightly. "I graduated third in my class from the United Empire Navy Academy on Christchurch in the Orion sector 40 years ago. It was one day before I married my Emmeline. How did you know I went to one of the Navy academies?" Stone smiled and pointed at the man's hand. "You still wear your ring, signore. And if I may ask another question, and this one is quite personal?" At Aldemani's nod, he continued, "When did you lose your leg?" "Ah, you saw that too, did you? Good eyes, son." Aldemani smiled. "It fools almost everyone these days." "My Uncle Sten has a prosthetic one just like it," Stone smiled back, "and he levers himself out of a chair the same way you do. But Uncle Sten's leg is a plasticrete civilian model, not the government-issue titanium model like yours. So I assume you lost the leg in the service to the Emperor." Aldemani nodded. "I lost this leg in the war against the Ilarii while I was the first officer of the UENS heavy cruiser Spartan." Stone whipped back to Major Numos. "Sir, I submit that this gentleman has earned this seat, and the one for his wife also, by reason of his service to the Empire. If that is not reason enough for you, I will gladly submit to honorable combat against any one or all four of you."
"I am first midshipman," Heller said, "and I don't care how many of your swabby buddies you call over here."
"I am sorry, Lieutenant Heller." Stone shook his head. "I don't have any Navy buddies. This will just have to be between us, assuming you can stand the humiliation of being beaten in a fair fight by a— what did Lieutenant Vedrian say, a shrimp like me?"
Major Numos said, "Hold up, Heller. If Midshipman Stone can park his rear end on the cold deck, then you and Hammermill can do the same. After you apologize to the Aldemanis."
Stone smiled at the Aldemanis and gave them another bow, this time deeply from the waist, as his mother had taught him to do in the presence of honored elders. As the old man sat, the couple smiled their thanks, took each other's hands, and leaned together for comfort. Stone sighed and grabbed his duffel bag, prepared to go find a clear, out-of-the-way space on deck. Major Numos held up a hand to stop him. He pointed at the deck near his feet. Hammermill and Heller dropped to the deck on either side of Stone. Stone plopped down his duffel bag and settled heavily onto it with a sigh. Into the uncomfortable silence he said, "Sir, thank you." First Lieutenant Vedrian spoke, in an oddly sweet voice for such a massive woman. "Midshipman Stone, I am sure that Hellenbach is dying to ask you why you were so confident in taking him on in a fair fight, but he is too shy to ask." Hammermill reached across Stone and slapped Heller across the back of the head. "Shy? The day that Helpless turns shy is the day that I turn in my pecker." Vedrian snorted. "From what I hear, Hammer, your pecker don't do you much good anyway. So what do you say, Navy? Why do you think you could take on Hell and come out a winner?" "Winner?" Stone replied with a grin. "Lieutenant Vedrian, I don't think I could stand up to just one of Lieutenant Heller's punches. Even if he missed, the wind would most likely knock me down." Heller frowned amid the laughter from the other three Marines. Then a grin broke his face, and he guffawed the loudest of the bunch. Major Numos caught his breath and said, "Remind me not to play poker with you, boy. I was about half convinced that you must be some kind of super sailor. Most full-grown Navy types wouldn't think of taking on a Marine in a one-on-one fight, much less 4-to-1. "Sir, I wouldn't know about other Navy types. I haven't met too many outside of basic training and midshipman training school," Stone said. "I didn't think you had been in very long. When did you get your commission, son?" Major Numos asked. Stone glanced over his shoulder at the clock on the arrival and departure board. "Well, Major Numos, I earned my commission and took my midshipman oath about 7 hours ago. So far my Navy career has been to catch a shuttle up to the station and wait around here for my next ride." Lieutenant Vedrian laughed. "You are new at this. No wonder you weren't afraid to take on the Marines. You haven't been around long enough to know any better." Stone shook his head. "No, Lieutenant Vedrian, I was certainly scared to take on the Marines. Anyone in their right mind would be. But what is right is right. Grandma would skin me alive if she ever heard I backed down from a fight just because I might lose."
"Grandma sounds like a Marine," Heller said.
"No, sir," Stone replied. "She is just a common merchant sailor. But from what Grandpa says, when she isn't listening, that is, she took on her share of Marines in bars from everywhere to the back of beyond and home again."
"Where are you bound for, midshipman?" Major Numos asked.
"I have been assigned to the UENS Periodontitis, sir. Beyond that I don't know." The disbursement officer didn't tell me if I was being permanently stationed on the Periodontitis or if it is just my transport to my duty station. He just told me to hustle up here so I didn't miss the ship."
"Typical Remph," Heller laughed.
Stone looked confused. "Remph, sir?"
Heller said, "REMF. Rear Echelon Mother—"
"That's enough, helmet head," Major Numos interrupted.
"Let's just say the officer in question was an office weenie, and let it go at that, shall we?"
"Thank you, Major. My ears have never heard anything quite like that before." Stone grinned.
Major Numos laughed. "It isn't for you, midshipman. It is for the Aldemanis. I am sure they have heard Marines talking before, but we are supposed to be officers and gentlemen as well." He nodded to Signora Aldemani.
"Major, may I ask where you are headed?" Stone asked.
Lieutenant Vedrian answered with a grimace, as if she tasted something cold and bitter.
"It is an unhappy coincidence that we are also headed for the old Toothless." "Toothless, sir?" he asked.
She nodded.
"You haven't had time to look up the disease Periodontitis? All of the fleet calls it the old Toothless. Not just because of the disease, but from the scuttlebutt, the weapons are so—"
"We don't discuss that here, Vedrian," Major Numos interrupted. "Put a lid on it."
"Well, anyway, being on a ship called the Old Toothless still beats being on a ship named after diarrhea or syphilis. You know what those nicknames are," Hammermill said with a laugh. Signore Aldemani interjected, "Forgive me, but the Periodontitis is a fine ship from what I have been told. Our son is a first lieutenant stationed on her as a procurement officer. He only had good things to say about her and her admiral."
"Quite right, Signore." Major Numos nodded. "Forgive us. We did not mean any disrespect to you or your son. It is just that Marines often find it hard to be stationed on warehouse ships."
"Major, how does that happen?" Stone asked. "I know the Periodontitis is a warehouse and supply ship because of the name. What I mean is, how do Marines get stationed on a non-combat ship?"
Signore Aldemani answered, "Midshipman Stone, every vessel in the Emperor's fleet is a fighting ship, regardless of her normal duties. It would do you well to remember that."
Stone blushed and replied, "Yes, Signore, thank you. I will remember that."
Major Numos smiled. "Although what Signore Aldemani says is true, Marines are put on warehouse and supply ships because we are some of the parts and supplies that are warehoused and supplied from said ships. The Old Toothless carries a Marine unit in reserve and dispenses it as needed. We 4 officers are assigned to this particular ship to keep control of the Marines in transit. Believe me, no one likes what happens when Marines get bored."
"Well, I don't imagine that is a pleasant sight," Stone replied with a chuckle. Vedrian said, "Hey, I resent that. I've been a bored Marine, and I am not at all that unpleasant to look at." All 4 of the Marines laughed. "Yeah, in bed again, Vedrian, beauty queen of the Mud Marines," Hammermill said. Stone smiled. "If the lieutenant wouldn't mind, I would say she is very attractive. She is very scary, but attractive." "Huh, see there, you mutts," Vedrian laughed. "Even the Navy recognizes beauty when they sees it." Hammermill gave Stone a friendly poke in the ribs. "He is a midshipman, Vedrian. He doesn't know anything yet. He is so new he is still confused." Heller gave Stone a friendly poke in the ribs on the other side.
"Yeah, maybe we should get him up into Marine country to teach him some things, since we are going to be on the same ship."
Stone rubbed his ribs. He was sure they would be bruised in the morning. "Well, sir, I don't know whether my station is permanently on the Periodontitis or if I am just getting a lift. I don't know how much time I will have. But I would like to see around the ship as much as possible, so yes, I would like to see Marine country."
Major Numos nodded. "It is always best to learn as much as you can about any ship you are on, no matter how long you plan on being there. The Old Toothless is a bit old as warehouse and supply ships go, but it is still one of the biggest ships in the fleet. So, midshipman, it will take a lot of learning on your part."
"How big is it, Major?" Stone asked.
"It is half again bigger than this whole station," Major Numos replied. "And that is big, as this station is one of the biggest in this sector of space. I believe most of the military people in this area are waiting on the Old Toothless. The other ships listed on the tote board are mostly civilian ships or smaller military craft."
Stone asked, "Sir, how is the Periodontitis going to dock with the station if she is that big?"
Hammermill tapped Stone good-naturedly on the back of his head, rattling his teeth.
"Mr. Moron Midshipman, ships that size can dock, but they generally just send us a small fleet of shuttlecraft.
That way us Marines won't have to ride with you Navy types and contaminate you."
Stone rubbed the back of his head. "I don't get you, Lieutenant. How could you contaminate the Navy?" "Didn't you know, Stone? We don't get along," Vedrian replied with a laugh.
Major Numos stood abruptly. "That'll do, Marines. According to the tote board, we have about 10 minutes before we saddle up. Empty your bladders now, people. Then let's get all of the leathernecks together by the back bulkhead."
Without so much as a goodbye, they were gone. Signore Aldamani spoke up. "Midshipman Stone, I don't want to step on your toes, as you have been very kind to us. However, if I might say, some people in the Navy frown on fraternization with Marines. It might not be a good career move to be too friendly with them, if you get my meaning." "I understand, Signore," Stone nodded. "I am not sure I agree, but I do understand. I would have hoped things had changed since my time in the Navy, but tradition will hold out. And speaking of which, when your shuttle is called, hold back. There isn't any sense in rushing down to get on board. Tradition says you board your vessel by rank, so I imagine you will be sitting in the last seat of the last row of the last shuttle designated for officers." "I believe you might be right, sir. Thank you," Stone smiled. Signora Aldamani spoke. "Please don't be shy about looking up our son when you get on board your ship. I am sure he can be a big help if you need anything." A new voice caused Stone to look up. "Midshipman Stone? Get on your feet, Mr. Stone." A tall, somewhat heavy junior ensign stood over Stone. "Aye, aye, sir." Stone scrambled to his feet. The junior ensign said, "We are on the same shuttle. I require you to carry my luggage aboard." He dropped his duffel at Stone's feet. "Maybe carrying a little extra baggage will teach you not to play patty cakes with the grunts." The man turned and walked away without another word. Stone replied anyway, "Aye, aye, ensign." A second lieutenant stepped up to Stone and dropped his duffel bag. "You should also have reported in when you came into the area." "Yes, Lieutenant, but my orders said to report in to the duty officer on the periodontitis. Who should I have reported to here, sir?" The lieutenant snapped back, "You should have hunted down the highest-ranking Navy officer in the room to see if he needed anything." Another lieutenant dropped his luggage on the small pile at Stone's feet. "For that matter, midshipman, you should have presented yourself to every naval officer in the room to see if you could have been some service to anyone. Now, you can carry my luggage as well." Other ensigns and second lieutenants lined up to drop off their bags and duffels. Each officer gave Stone some small piece of advice. In short order, there was a fairly large pile of bags. The last officer balanced a backpack on the top of the pile. He said, "Midshipman Stone, if this bag doesn't get aboard the periodontitis or is scuffed up in any way, I will see that you will spend your entire career in the Navy moving boxes around in a warehouse." The man leaned in close. "I mean it, mister. Don't screw this up, or I can guarantee that you will end up on third watch in the most boring warehouse position I can find for you."